G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic Friday. And I'm still really feeling under the weather. So if I go off on a tangent, well, that's actually normal, but maybe more so today. But what we're going to talk about, we need to talk about some information of which you've actually been introduced to this guy. So in my interview with a guy that fought with Wagner PMC, he's actually been back on the front line in the north, and he's given me some rundown of the situation there and what happened to himself. And it's the first I've actually seen of what the Russian perspective of what actually happened up in there. Now, if you're not seeing that, well, I may have cut that out of the video, but we're going to talk about planes, the promises of French Mirages to Ukraine with, of course, from Emmanuel Macron. We're going to talk about Zelenskyy and a new institute study that's come out about his presidency from how Ukrainians feel about this. We're going to look at a number of strikes that Ukraine has successfully carried out inside of Russia. We need to look at a strike back in against fighter aircraft as well. And of course, then we'll look at the maps. But something I want to speak about is mainly the main analytical part of this video, and I'm not going to go too in-depth on this video, is about who would Putin want to actually win the US election. Is it Biden or is it Trump? And I think it goes a step further, and you need a little bit of mental gymnastics in here because, of course, Putin has stated that he thinks Biden would be the better president. That's what he's officially stated. But many would point that, well, Trump has vowed to end the war. But we're going to talk about that, and we need to look outside of Ukraine at other operations and asymmetrical warfare going on to discuss that. And we'll break that down maybe 50% in this video. If you want me to do a full breakdown, it might take me half an hour, but I'm happy to do it if you'd like to see this. So let's talk about the maps and the North info straight off the bat. So, of course, here we have Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now we'll come up Kharkiv Oblast, that of course borders Russia's Belgorod Oblast in here. This has been the area of much discussion because not only did Russia open 2 new front lines here, this is where Ukraine has had then the lifting of restrictions to strike back at buildup of Russian troops in here, and we know Ukraine is committing a lot of forces to try and push this back. Now, you're not seeing any change on this map for now, well over a week, any Russian or Ukrainian change. What we do know is Ukraine is pumping a lot of guys in here and having some success pushing the Russians back in Volchansk. What we have spoken about and have speculated is this still part of the Russian plan? If Russia's got, say, 30 units in here and Ukraine has 100, well, that is lifting reserves from other areas where Russia is having some success. But regardless, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what Kum has then sent across. I got caught up on the Northern Front. I didn't want to go back to this war, but I had to. Each of my trips to the zone shows me a new war. Now I have seen how our people are fighting remotely with the help of aerial bombs. These are FABs. Although I did not believe what they are saying on the TV, I was convinced with my own eyes, a creepy theme. Now I'm back in the hospital resting. Now, what we do know of another contact was at least 10% of the Russians that crossed were injured by mines then alone. As usual, I was in the midst of adventures. I can't imagine how Ukrainians survived there. Spoiler, no way. When an air bomb explodes 600 meters away from you and you jump up, you're afraid to imagine what is happening within a radius of 50 meters. And these bombs are going to fall right on the dugouts and trenches. At the same time, the targets are not selected by priority. Absolutely everything is destroyed. Like we see, Volchansk has been basically brought down to ruins from these bombs going in, Ukrainian counterattacks there as well. I pray that this war will end faster and fewer people will die. We entered the strongholds from which no one has taken out. They were filled with burst men and those who could not have been saved. But they did not send an evacuation for them. It's sad. But now Ukrainians are dying for nothing. Moreover, these are the very Ukrainians who most likely do not want or are tired of fighting. We find mountains of your weapons, which do not affect the course of the battles in any way. We just take and burn their armoured vehicles. Now, I just thought giving this perspective is very interesting as well. Now, of course, with everything, you need to take a grain of salt with things, but I'm doing, I think, due diligence of actually being a reporter in this and having and sharing perspectives on 2 sides of what is going on, especially from men on the ground. So then we will then have a look at the maps and see what is changing. Now, there's only one change on the deep state map today, but it does look like Russia is having some advancement around this Yahidny Kislivka front, Ivanivka. Now, we have seen they have really fired up over here over the past couple of weeks. We saw maybe a week and a half ago Russia make a fair bit of ground considering out near Berestov, and now we're seeing some out in Yahidny. Now, we assume out in here they're trying to get to Kupiansk and open a front here. Now, if you saw my video a couple of weeks back, if you hang around here a little bit, that I did have a contact say there is going to be a northern but a western front open here. So a northern up here, but it's going to push west rather than pushing south on here, with then a far western push to the south coming out from somewhere near Graveron, Kozinka area here being the westernmost on this. But again, we're not 100% sure what is going on, but we can see some change in there. But on this map, we don't see any other changes. But we do have some Noel reports. Now, Syriac, he's super busy, and he has publicly said, I need to take some time off. So I hope he gets the time that he needs. Go and follow him yourself, support his work. I think he does a really, really great job. So then we need to talk about then Chasiv Yar Bakhmut front. Now, where are we looking? This is a little bit difficult sometimes to line up, but we will manage. Here is then Ivanovsky. This is one road of life, and this is the second road of life, just above where we're looking, but of course, Kromove through. Now, this in here, this is the river that runs through here. So river, and this is then the forest belt that just sits to the south of Avdiivka. Now, what you can see by Noel Reports' map is he is showing that Russians have got right up into now these positions here, advancing from this map somewhere around maybe 500 to 700 meters in here, but of course opening that flank for this area here. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a pushback across then the river here. We're not sure. We know multiple bridges are taken down, and crossing anywhere is hard. Now, none of these maps show this, but we have got some reports that Ukraine did launch a successful counterattack in Kalinivka here and did push the Russians back to Bodanivka, but again, not sure. None of the maps that I typically use are then showing this. Then we come down, no other changes shown on this map. Maybe a tiny one in Krasnodarivka. Sorry, I missed that in my research. But then we come down to Urozhany in here, where we see where the Ukrainian counteroffensive then was. And then we do see just into the out of Staromaorsky, we can see more of a push shown on Noel Reports map. That said, he's showing around about the same as now what the deep state is showing, but not as much out to then the west. So deep state on that is where we'll believe it. Deep state is actually showing more in that area than even Syriac was at one point. Now, this map hasn't updated. Yesterday I spoke about up here, we did see those Russian paratroopers working right about here. Now, this is still seen as green. It should at least be grey, maybe red. If they're operating there, we know they were targeted, but that is definitely then grey zone. Now, let's talk about a couple of, let's look at strikes first in here. Now, of course, we can't ignore this. The GUR released video here in Crimea targeting a Project 498 ship. Now, everyone's saying 498 warship, blah, blah, blah. No, Project 498 is a tugboat like this. Let's not say it was Moskva Mark II. That said, this port logistics is very important. So don't downplay the importance of port logistics either, but let's not say that this is the bloody cream of the crop ship, of which we have seen successfully targeted. Now, the most interesting part in this footage that I'll show, and I believe the most concerning for the Russians, would actually be this. So as we come across here, we can see that these are the barricades set up to protect areas in the port. Now, we can see the ship, little V5 boat, looking around of where is a gap then through this, and then, okay, found a gap, and aims and spits through here. Now, what we can see is there does seem to be some damage. See how these are linked? It does seem, see how these are all linked? It does seem that this one here has been damaged. So there may be a sacrificial drone boat to go in, blow this up, create a hole to then push through in there. Maybe it's running a different sort of charge as well for that. And then, of course, we see then into the side of the tugboat. Now, of course, we've seen barricades like that set up in areas like, of course, to protect the Kerch Strait Bridge. But sacrificial ship will push through, a sacrificial one to take out that will then push through on there. Now, we have seen as well this Novoshatki a refinery in Rostov has been targeted by Ukrainian drones overnight. Now, this is the massive fires that have been caused here. And we do then have some satellite imagery coming up as well. So we see this first image here, and then the second image, we'll compare these together, showing that damage there. But it does look like most of these tanks have been unharmed in the hits in here. One thing we do know about oil refineries is, yes, very, very flammable, but they're also specifically built to deter or to, if there is any fire, to extinguish that as quickly as possible. And what those effects will have, it won't be instant. It will be much, much down the line. Actually, in the near term, it actually increases the oil price, therefore actually increases Russia's cash flow, supply and demand, but long term may start having effects on the Russian economy. Now, yesterday we spoke about strikes that Russia said potentially giving to third-party players to strike against the UK, the US, France, areas like this, now that these countries have given Ukraine permission to strike within Russia. Now, Medvedev, who's always entertaining on Twitter, has then said this. Now, may the United States and allies experience firsthand the direct use of Russian weapons by third parties. These persons or regions have been internationally left unnamed, but it can be those who consider the Yankee land, so America and their enemy, who consider America and co, so anyone in that influence, their enemy, regardless of their political outlook and international recognition. Their enemy is the US, and that means to us, they are friends. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, this guy down here, he says exactly what I said, that may happen. Send weapons to Iran, Syria, Lebanon, North Korea. Iran, Syria, and Lebanon can forward some of them to H-word. And the Houthis give NK, North Korea, missiles capable of hitting US base in Okinawa. So this is what we said yesterday. We could potentially see a proxy used like that on those systems. Now, I believe a lot of this is maybe saber rattling at this point in time, but potentially could we then see that? We're seeing Ukraine use US, UK weapons to hit Russia. Could we see Russia supplying weapons to these countries to then strike UK, US? As we talk about this ladder of escalation being climbed, will we see US strike Russia? I don't think so. The longer this goes on, the more likely I think that becomes, but I still am hopeful that won't because the outcome of that. But we'll see more and more proxy being used in cases like this. Now, let's talk a little bit about planes, then we'll talk about US politics. Now, we do see a Lancet here, and then coming in, and this is a Ukrainian Su-25 Rook here in Kryvyi Rih. Now, interestingly, with this footage, you can see just how much this is getting hit by things like electronic warfare. It's cutting in and out. It's all over the place. So it's a Lancet probably at its absolute max range getting hit by a lot of these other systems, but does manage a successful strike on then this target here. It does, yep, right there. Now, of course, airframes are very fragile compared to other targets, compared to a tank, so we're not sure exactly what the damage there was. Now, we got the reporters as I'm recording of this by Ausint Defender reports tonight that this airbase in here, region of Western Ukraine, so this is the one we see a lot of the missiles come out of into then this region right here. This region here is where Russia's been targeting a hell of a lot of recently. The base, the home of the 7th Tactical Aviation of the Ukrainian Air Force, which operates the Su-24 Offense D tactical bomber Soviet-era plane, which armed with Storm Shadow Scalp air-launched missiles. This likely explains why this airbase has been the primary target of Russia during majority of their missile attacks, and could explain why we have seen a significant decrease in Ukrainian strikes using Storm Shadow Scalp. So we haven't seen many strikes recently with Storm Shadow Scalp. Even if we know some of those restrictions may have been lifted, we've seen a hell of a lot of Russian strikes heading into here, as well as confirmed that some missiles and stuff fired weren't shot down. So we're not sure what the impact was. As we know, Ukraine has any battle damage assessment photographs, everything absolutely locked down, and people could go to jail for it. So we're not exactly sure, but we know likely that's where the F-16s are going to go, and I think Russia's trying to soften this up as much as possible. But staying on the theme of fighter aircraft, President Emmanuel Macron announced Thursday that France would send Mirage 2000 fighter jets to Ukraine, saying tomorrow we will launch a new cooperation announcement of transfer of Mirage 2000s, which help Ukraine protect its skies. Now, we don't know a number of these. We don't know how the supply chain and logistics will have to be spun up to do this, as well as the support staff here and the training of the pilots. Now, some of this has been somewhat cleared up. A key factor is pilot training time. So we're going to propose to President Zelenskyy the pilots be trained as early as this summer. It takes 5 to 6 months. So at the end of the year, be able to fly these aircraft. Now, I'm not a pilot, I'm not a training, but We've seen the F-16s well over a year, and even then people questioning the level of that training when it takes years and years typically. Yet to fly, take off, whatever may take that long, but to fly in the most challenging airspace that fighter aircraft have ever entered, maybe not will, have ever entered, the people have said this is just not long enough in the training time here. And many people have factored, why are you trying to bring in another aircraft type? Just support more of the F-16 where you already have staff trained, you've already got the logistics, and of course F-16s in numerical values are just unbelievably bloody everywhere with the US on full support. But that is interesting then to see there. We know France is lifting its support to Ukraine dramatically, including they're the main large country other than the Baltics, pushing that there will be more troops on the ground, whatever, coming in from France. We don't know. One thing I wanted to say, we saw those coffins with French flags put out the front of the Eiffel Tower the other day. Now, it's being investigated as like some FSB intelligence operation, and my take is it could be that, but it could just be people too that are not supporting of young men from their country going to war either. You know, not everything is just a psyop. Not everyone thinks they're the same way. Now, let's talk about the US election. I know this is something you're wading into hot water here with everyone, at least 50% of your audience hating you, but I'm going to do one better. I'm going to have 100% of my audience hate me right here. I'm going to criticize both sides of this and point out some maybe flaws that will play into the rest of the world. But let's talk about Putin. Now, Putin has publicly stated that he thinks Biden would be better over Trump. Now, what we have seen is Trump has vowed to end the war in 24 hours. Now, people would say, well, wouldn't then Putin want Trump into power? He's spoken about negotiation, this or that. What I'll say is if Putin thinks that he can succeed on the battlefield, he doesn't want this. If he really thinks that he can continue because we're seeing the front line move in his favour, if he thinks that can continue moving like this, he doesn't want to be pressured into the war. Okay, but he speaks about negotiations. That may be a tactic to sell the war. Like, look, they're not giving up. We need to mobilise another 500,000 men to go and fight. You got to remember there's everything from psyops in play, counterintelligence play, all of this as well. But that is just interesting to talk about there. But what will be interesting to see is what measures intelligence agencies, both foreign and domestic, I will say, will have to play in this election. Now, we may not see it, but it will be interesting because we know that then happens, even if people say, oh, there's none of this, none of that. We know that there's messaging and all of this come around the world. It's impossible to stop with social media and all of this now. But we need to talk outside of Ukraine for how Russia and China may actually feel, because either one of these polarizing figures, I actually believe, helps their order, because division in the US that any of these candidates will cause and has already been causing actually helps especially China for where they're seeing things go. Now, both Russia and China have increasing influence in Asia and Africa, and in a lot of conservative traditionalist countries, they absolutely push the idea that the West has abandoned these values. And they're pushing onto that you can have state sovereignty rather than this try and export of Western democracy that the West tried to do. And we know that this is exacerbated by active measures by Russian security agencies, Chinese security agencies, intelligence agencies, and PMCs, as well as using then Islamic groups with Russian security intelligence agencies as well. But as well, that this is like all propaganda, you're getting a truth and you're pushing further on that truth. That has the West abandoned some of those conservative values, traditional values, family values? Yes. And then sort of picking at that thread to push it further and further. And of course, this has been sped up dramatically by the US stance in Palestine. So let's talk about Biden and Trump in this, and then I'll break down some more. That Biden is seen as a voice for change, for progressive measures. And this is the opposite of many of the values then put above. Of course, helping that campaign, trying to push onto these countries and decreasing influence in selling democracy to many of these traditionalist, maybe religious countries. Now, Trump's whole law is the MAGA, Make America Great Again, but America First, which also plays on these traditional values. But Of course, being this America first could cause an abandonment of operations in these areas, therefore increasing the influence that China and Russia have. Now, I just want to break down a couple of things from a report here then as well. Now, this is going to take me just a second because I've put tabs all through this to talk about. Now, if you want me to break down this full report on, like, say, asymmetrical warfare and outside of Russia and Ukraine and how that focus in Indo-Pacific due to China and focus into Ukraine through Russia because of the war here may actually be blinding other aspects. That's basically what it does, and I can break down this full thing. But at a time when many Western states were trying to economically isolate Russia following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin saw the development of economic ties with Africa and the Middle East as measures to sanction-proof Russia, and had a pitch for leaders of these states. It centered on the proposition that the international rules-based order advocated for by the West structurally favored Western interests, whereas Russia's emphasis on sovereignty would offer a mutually beneficial partnership. The reality, as Russian officials acknowledged internally, was renewed Russian colonialism. Nevertheless, the Kremlin, through the GRU, so an intelligence agency of the military, has now set about seeking to build an entente Roscolonial, a group of states that actively seek to assist Russia while also becoming increasingly subordinate to Russian influence, displacing Western interests across Africa and the Middle East. So then through friendly partnerships, so entente, and colonialism through there, but maybe unseen. Now let's skip forward just a little bit and remember some of these words and stuff we're talking about. And I can break this down better when I'm feeling better. But the entente Roscolonial is a serious threat to Western interests. First, with the US increasingly fixated on the Indo-Pacific and European attention saturated by the war in Ukraine, most African operations have become an economy of force affairs. Moreover, the disparity of resourcing and attention paid to Ukraine or Gaza as compared to Tigray, for instance, has left a strong, bitter sense across Africa as to the hierarchy of Western concerns. Similarly, the apparent contrast in Western language and rhetoric about how it described the destruction of Aleppo or Mariupol and how it excused Israeli operations in Gaza leave many on the continent perceiving a gap between Western rhetoric about values and the values practiced by those who have for so long imposed constraints on the policies of African states to enforce value-based norms. So talking more than about sovereignty. Western security assistance in favour of Russia is almost that of sovereignty. So a common theme you'll see here is this sovereignty rather than the export-import of maybe a Western rules-based order democracy. Russia's Expeditionary Corps is intended to be the vanguard of Putin's multipolar worldview, offering those who reject Western legal structures the means to preserve their rule and wreak violence on their enemies. If the Expeditionary Corps is an offer to elites, there are more populist narratives that Russia pushes at the range of constituencies. Russia's argument is that it is the bastion of traditional values embodied by religiosity, the nuclear family, heterosexuality, and loyalty to the state. The Orthodox Church pushes these outreach groups in the US and through social media to conservative constituencies across Western Europe and Northern America. This vision of Russia is contrasted with the depiction of West, according to some, as the increasingly lurid propaganda narratives being promoted, a bastion of decadent homosexual worship of Satan. The Russian narrative of its defense of traditional values finds a particular expression of confluence with Russia's unconventional warfare capabilities in Chechnya under Kadyrov. Now, we need to talk about Kadyrov. I'll do this in another video. That Kadyrov is taken as these TikTok, as they put here, comic as does it tragic to Western audience, but perceptions of Chechen leader are inaccurate. So it doesn't matter what you see, what we think. The perception being exported is far different to that. But I'll talk on this top bit here in the yellow that I think we maybe overestimate, and I think the FSB, GRU, and the other security agencies are sort of taking props. I think they're just picking at that thread of propaganda. But have we seen a move away from traditional values? And this, yes. And what they have done is maybe just poke at that more. But I think we've had far more influence on that ourselves rather than the FSB, GRU, that is taking a bit of props for it. Finally, Russia's progress in Africa is referred to in this report as the formation of an entente Roscolonial. On one hand, the Russian officials admit internally, it's a colonial project to gain control over African governments and exploit the continent's natural resources. On the other hand, an entente, or informal or friendly alliance between countries. So it's breaking down just the two words. Russia's mandate is due to the West's strategic neglect and its failures to address the problems its partners face. Russia may also fail to do this, but for now, frustration with the West, both in Africa and the Middle East, is high. The point is, while Western states focus on rebuilding their conventional deterrence in Europe, strategic documents emphasising the nature of global competition are being vindicated, yet Western states are failing to compete. This must change. Russia is using unconventional warfare to advance its vision of a multipolar world order. This poses threats far beyond Ukraine, and it's critical that Western states rise to meet the challenge. Now, another video I will do at some point of time is I will talk about after the war too, and how we're going to need to maybe shift some things around too, maybe to plug holes on things like this happening, and alliances are going to be built people are not really going to like, especially when we look at geography of where Russia sits in the world and China and the move towards a multipolar world. Now, Kiev Institute Research of Study, KISS, I could have got the name wrong, has then put this out. As you can see, I'm not feeling great. It's been 5 years since Volodymyr Zelenskyy became president. In your opinion, to what extent did he fulfill his pre-election promises? So 5% here, all or nearly all promises, 13. Most of the promises have been fulfilled. Half the promises were fulfilled at 19. Now, the two largest here, a minority of promises, and none of the promises are then at 50% of total asked. And for what reasons, in your opinion, did Volodymyr Zelenskyy fail to fulfill his promises? Choose up to 3 most important. So here at 50%, the presence of dishonest, corrupt people in his team. We have seen Zelenskyy sack many people throughout this war as well, and we still have many corruption scandals going down. But one thing a lot of people tell me is, well, what is happening to these guys that are caught to be corrupt? Are they getting actually criminal charged, or do they pay off their couple $100,000 bond and they're out again fine as oligarchs? Anyway, the lack of competent people then at 32, full-scale invasion got in the way of fulfillment, so he can't do this due to that. Own experience, lack of competence, so 27, influence of oligarchs at 26 here, which I think ties in then with then number 1 and 2 as well, and own corruption, blah, 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 down the line. So it's interesting to look at that too. Now, they give then a survey results here. In additional open-ended questions, respondents most often recall promises as ending the war in Donbass, fighting corruption, improving welfare of the population. And obviously, these dimensions played an important role when response evaluated the president's fulfillment of pre-election promises. Now, one thing a lot of people tell me in the East is there was a lot of money put to rebuild roads, and the joke in the East was they're building new roads for Russian tanks to drive down. At the same time, among the main successes of the president in his position, Ukrainians talk about stability and repelling Russian aggression and international activity aimed at strengthening support for the war in Ukraine. It's important to note that Ukrainians mostly focus not on the president himself, on his personal qualities, but his entourage team. So an additional open question about the president's failures, most people talked about full-scale invasion and the personal policy. So interesting then to look at, and we know we're not going to get an election anytime soon, but we will see where this war then goes in the future, as far as and influence outside of that, obviously, of which we have spoken about. Legends, I feel terrible. Look after yourselves. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. I might be on the couch. Look after yourselves. Speak tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.